because we are already 12 minutes into it, and the other ones, let's see if they can join later. But to the ones that I believe that only Sonia and Nachi weren't here when we had the chapter 1. I believe everybody else, we were here with other people, and of course our friend Matthew that joins us like 1 minute to finish, and I think he forgot again today because he wrote me yesterday that he was joining, but he always mixes up the time and he arrives in his time. That's 1 hour. I don't know, it's backward. Yeah, I think he's one in Texas is 1 hour backward.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this book is beautiful, and you girls are you can read the PDF, you can buy the book, and I was gonna say there is an audio book, but there is audio book just in Portuguese, not in English.
Right.
But so who could summarize chapter 1 really quickly? Who could do a little summary of chapter 1? I know Shemay is doing the final 2 pages, but who could do something really quickly just to help Nachi and Sonia to understand what was it about?
Well, what I read on chapter 1, she wants to help her I guess the love of her life. But
Yes.
it seems to me from what I read that he wants to be with her, but on his terms, because he's telling her he's going to do all these good deeds, and he's not feeling it. He just wants for her to be with him.
Yes.
That's what
pretty much is this. So it is Alcyone is the main character in the book. She's a very elevated spirit. She doesn't pertain to the planet Earth anymore because she evolved and she left the planet. Just so you understand how elevated she is. She left the planet, and she's in a place that's much more developed. But there is a spirit that was the love of her life, but he failed her more or less 3 times in previous reincarnations. And he is still on Earth, and he actually was in the lower zones, being prepared to reincarnate on Earth again. And so he was with he failed with a bunch of other priests. They were all religious people who failed for whatever reason. And this like the spiritual guide is telling them, okay, you guys are gonna go back to Earth, and he's saying life will not be easy, will be difficult, because you guys made a lot of mistakes, so you will have to go through this. So he started telling them to be strong, but if they overcome that, will be much better. They will have a lot of improvement. And then Pollux is one of these many priests, and Pollux, they all leave, and Pollux remains, and he's very upset. He's very upset that he's going to go back to Earth to face so many adversities, and he doesn't know what to do. And then he makes a prayer. He makes a prayer thinking about her, because he knows she is far away from him, because the previous reincarnation, like I don't know if it's the previous or the 2 previous, he failed upon her again. He hurt her. Anyway, and then during this prayer, she appears. And then he is like, oh my God, the love of my life, blah, blah, blah. And then he is begging her to go back to Earth with him. So it would help him through his reincarnation, because she would be there. But like you said, Sonia, he sees her like a very woman figure. He's the physical attraction, more or less. And for her, it is a physical attraction, but she sees him as a whole spirit. She loves him in spirit. And then long story short, when he has to go to reincarnate because he's kind of falling asleep, he asked her, "Oh, can I give you a kiss?" And then she mentions to him, "Hey, hold on, let's kiss Jesus." Jesus, okay, let's kiss Jesus. So it's more or less what's going on, and he is falling asleep because he's going to go through the process of sleeping. His perispirit's going to be shrinking because he's going to be a little baby. And then Shimei was going to finalize the last page, 2 pages, just to close the chapter for us, and then Brian will start the chapter, the second chapter. Okay, Shimei, it's all yours.
Okay, good. I took some notes, but I didn't really need to because, I remember a lot of this drama. But as you said, the painful, dramatic ending to their time. And then Alcyone is soon in this magnificent place. And she describes seeing 3 suns, exquisite buildings, flowers, castles with gold and multicolors. And she also sees what they describe as winged beings, angels, I guess, and this majestic shrine. She also says that she's passing several friends. She is also approached by this, and Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, because I get a little confused at the way it's written, but I think I get the gist of it. But she's approached by this higher ranked entity or angel, and he mentions her thought and her request about how she has asked the Lord to allow her to return to earth.
Yes,
And
he is Mr. Antonio. He is her spiritual guide. He is a higher rank than her. He's responsible for what's going on in her life now and all the work that she's doing. So yes, exactly. He is above her and he's guiding her, telling her, "What? You're gonna go back?"
And asking her why. And she's basically begging and reassuring, but he's saying, "Are you sure you have the courage to do this?" And he wants her to continue assisting those she loves from where she is instead of returning to earth. And he advises her about all of the obstacles and the pain that she will face and how great it will be. She'll also experience temporary memory loss, and she'll have the same longings for love that humans do, obviously, but he just can't understand why she would want to be making this choice. And he is talking about the fact that Pollock, her love, is reincarnating with duties that are very important in society. And he asks her if she's ready to stay focused and make sure he's safe and sound in his single life. And the higher guide says that she will have love desires. She'll be filled with wishes. She will have a desire to have his children. And her loved ones from the past, her parents are mentioned, and they are apparently going to have harsh struggles and trials along with her friends from the past. So he asks her, "Are you sure you're going to be strong enough to take on this serious commitment?" He also mentioned that others that decide to take this on, like she is, kind of cutting short her time and work where she is now, are overburdened, and then they return and they've taken away from their spiritual evolution, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. And then in the end, she accepts, she understands everything, and she promised that she will be very strict, loving Pollux in a holistic way, because Pollux has an important mission. It's like he's supposed to be a priest again. He's supposed not to have a family. He's supposed to be bachelor, and it's not what he has in mind. He has in mind falling in love and getting married to her. So this is already like difficult. And he also tells her, be prepared because he might fail. He says to her, I don't think he will be strong enough to overcome these difficulties. And then the chapter ends with her traveling back to Earth. And it's very beautiful because a lot of people see that spot of light, almost like when we see in the sky that there is it's not a meteor, it's like a estrela cadente in Portuguese.
A falling star?
The what?
Like a falling star?
Yes, yes. Falling star. Is this falling star leaving the heavens, going back to Earth? And then we go to chapter 2. So Brian, before anyone has any questions, because Sandra, Tina, Yvonne, you may read and you didn't understand something, because I know sometimes it can be confusing. Any question from chapter 1? Is everything good?
I mean,
I'm okay.
I understand what the story is, but my questions are more about, they talk about she's sitting down, they talk about buildings, they're talking about rooms, and I'm trying to picture that, right? We have buildings here, we have chairs here, and somebody can sit on our lap. Yet we're saying that in the spiritual realm is spirits and a light and a figure that you can't really see. So I'm thinking, so how is that? Is that figuratively that they speak about those things, or is there a real building?
They exist, really.
How is that possible? That's just something that in my mind I can't understand that.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand. It can be a little bit difficult to understand, but it's almost like there are lots of concepts nowadays about a double dimension. A lot of people talk about it. Oh, we live here, but there is another dimension that we can also live, almost like Matrix. I don't know if you remember the movie Matrix. You take the green pill, you wake up. You take the red pill, you continue sleeping. You need to watch Matrix again. It's an amazing movie. So in the spiritual realm, we have the same things that we have here, the same things. It's just that here on Earth, everything is physical. It's material. In the spiritual realm, it is built on energy, on fluids. For example, we have clothes here, like Brian just did. You need to take some clothes physically and put another one physically. In the spiritual realm, your thoughts change your clothes. That's why I say, oh, I'm going to have this gorgeous red dress with all kinds of things flying around. Because you can think of that and you change it. I will be blonde with blue eyes. Woo-hoo! But it's difficult for us to think this is possible because we still are very materially connected to Earth. So we have this difficulty to understand. But the spirits tell us that everything that we have here is a copy of what is there in the spiritual realm. There is a short story that a spirit that was in the spiritual realm, and he saw this phenomenal painting. Beautiful. I don't remember exactly who is the painter now. It's very famous. And then he says, oh, I saw a painting similar to that on Earth, and the painter did this, blah, 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 blah. And the spiritual guide say, oh, that painter, he traveled here in spirit, he remember, and then when he went to Earth, he painted a copy. So it's like a poor copy, because it was just what he remembered. So it can be difficult for you to understand, Sandra, right now, but basically it is like this. Everything that we have here, we have there, but it's more advanced. It's just that it's not physical as you imagine. Like we were mentioning last week, that we also eat in the spiritual realm, but it's not like here you kill a cow to eat a steak. No, it's much more fluidic. So it's like vegetables, soups, very liquid, because you are feeding your spirit. There is no physical body needs anymore. But this will come little by little for you to understand this new reality. Okay, Brian, let's go to chapter 2. Oh, you're on mute.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're starting chapter 2, and this is where things get interesting, because now all of a sudden we have a character change. Because now we are in 1662, so we're before Allan Kardec and before the doctrine and all this other stuff. Now we start having new people. We have Cyril Davenport coming in, and we have his sister Susanna, and they start at the start of chapter 2. They're out having a carriage ride, and coming to find out that in the middle of this carriage ride, Susanna, we find out in the audience that Susanna actually has feelings for her cousin Cyril. But in the course of this beginnings of this chapter, we find out that Cyril actually has feelings for someone else. So we're starting a love triangle here.
Yeah. Problems already starting.
Nothing but
Problems
drama.
And it's important for us to understand that this story is passing in France, in Paris. And this couple that's the cousins, they are from Ireland. And this other girl, that the triangle lover girl, she is from Spain. So we have this happening in Europe.
Yes. Yeah, it's all taking place in Paris. That's why I forgot to mention that, since we're ahead of Allan Kardec. We're in Paris. We're setting up. So now, like I said, we just got over chapter 1 with Pollux, Alcyone, and all these others. We don't know who they are yet in this chapter. They're not identified. So we don't really know if Cyril is Pollux and this was it Magdalena, I think?
Yeah.
And she's Alcyone. I don't know. Or is it Susanna? We don't know.
I was
Or is
wanting
it
it
maybe
to be Susanna.
But I thought that Pulex was supposed to be a priest.
Cha 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 cha.
This is the challenge.
Cha cha cha. But
Yes.
Sandra, another thing that you have to remember is like we have our plan, in the spiritual realm. We promise all kinds of things. We will do this, and this. And when we come back, many times we change our minds. We decide to do something else. That's why our Saint Antonio, the guide of Alcyone, is telling her, this is dangerous, because you're going to go back to Earth, where at this moment, Earth is not a good place. And our Antonio reminds her, this is a place of a very corrupt politicians. They're still corrupt until now. And it also mentions of a very dirty priests. He mentions that. So he mentions that there are so many bad priests, and she will be involved in this situation. Go ahead, Brian.
All right. So we start to see that Cyril confesses to his cousin Susanna that he has feeling for this other woman. Now we see that she now starts building a hidden resentment. She has a hidden hatred for this other woman because she has a rival for the infection. And then as we go on and meet later on in the chapter, we go and we meet Magdalena's parents, and we find out that they have been in financial troubles to the point where they are living at their cousin's house, and that cousin wants to marry Magdalena. So now we're adding another dimension to this, and he's very good at hiding it. He played the politics. So he's sitting there, and he's being very nice to Cyril and everything else, welcoming him as a brother, welcoming him as a friend, and everything else. But he's sitting there. But as you read through the chapter, you see him that he's starting to build resentment. And he says, like, I want to make sure that Cyril falls down. If he falls, I'll be there to pick up Magdalena. I will be with her from that point on. So setting up a lot of tension, a lot of drama. It's already in the works.
Yeah.
And then as we go along, we find out that that Cyril has an uncle, a very nice, wise uncle that lives in another town. Bistel. Where's the name of it?
My version is in Portuguese. I don't remember the one in English.
You're not talking about James Davenport, the father of Susanna?
Yes, that's Susanna's father, but it's also Cyril's uncle, and he raised both of them up like as children, as family. I'm kind of, as I'm reading this, I kind of see that how James Davenport, in many ways, has a lot of precursors to Allan Kardec, because you start to see how he's involving his students. He's kind of like, even though Pestalozzi hasn't embraced his new style of teaching yet, here's this person that has a love of teaching and inspires that love in his students, to the point where all his students are coming back and listening to him, and they're treating him like a father figure, even though he had no wealth.
Yes.
What he imparted on them, how he treated his students, they had a reverence of him that transcended money. So he had a different type of power, and everyone looked up to him and respected him, even though he was not a lowly professor. And I'm seeing the parallels between him and Kardec, or even Pestalozzi, because we are, like I said, we're roughly 200 years. We're more than enough time for James to pass on, spend some time in the spirit world, come back and become one of these other people, which may also set up, and going outside, the discussion is that might set up where Emmanuel kind of fits into this, how he's tied into Spiritism, even though he's through with Chico, how Emmanuel is tied into accelerating the Spiritist doctrine. So
Emmanuel is the priest that guides Alcyone when incarnated. He is the one who started the book telling about his life and how he met Alcyone when she was a little child and a little angel. So Shemaine and all of you that don't know Spiritism so well, Emmanuel is the spiritual guide for Chico Xavier, the Brazilian medium that's wrote over 440 books. And he is the one who wrote this book to starting to tell his life story. He was a priest, but also Alcyone, and telling how elevated she was and how she incarnated.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I haven't read this. I haven't read this book, so I'm reading this for the first time. I read 50 years later, and I read 2,000 years ago. So now I'm sitting here like Livia, we know, passed away in 2,000 years ago, and she was immediately elevated because she never shows up in 50 years later. And we know that Emmanuel, from being Publius Lentus in 2,000 years ago, he's then I can't even remember his name in 50 years later, but he becomes a servant. Yes. So he's changing names as expected with each reincarnation, but he's not helping us draw the lines on, with the exception of 50 years later and 2,000 years ago, you can see the crossing. You can see who Emmanuel was and where he was. But this one, I can't find him yet. And I also don't know if Alcyone is actually Livia from 2,000 years ago. That's coming back down to help.
Yeah.
Because this is one of those things. Like, this is one of those things where you got the threads through multiple lives. And yes, this is Emmanuel's story through 3 lives, 3 of many. But we have people that were impacting his life in 2,000 years ago, impacting his life in 50 years later. And we know that through our teachings in Spiritism, how we have an orbit where we bring a lot of spirits that stay in our orbit, even though they're not incarnated with us. They're like, as we said in chapter 1, Alcyone was watching over Pollux, even though Pollux couldn't see her. She was she literally was visiting him, but he couldn't see her because she was so elevated. And now we're starting to see that it's this Livia from 2,000 years ago who had another life, and then elevated to the point where she became Alcyone. Now she's still watching over Pollux / Emmanuel, but could this be Emmanuel?
No, Pollux is a different spirit, because everybody, you might be very confused, because Brian is talking about the 2 other books, and he's trying to make a comparison. So you probably are all confused, not understanding. Brian, focus on this book, because they are not spiritists. They never read those books you were mentioning, so they have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, if you want to read the first book, Love and Light in New Jersey, they're doing that on Mondays. So they're in chapter 10 of 2,000 years ago.
Wow. Well, it has to be from the beginning for them to. That's another amazing book, 2,000 years ago. But just for you, for your own doubts, Emmanuel and Alcyone and Pollux are all reincarnated together. So Emmanuel cannot be Pollux. Pollux is a different spirit. Emmanuel is Padre Damiano, the priest that is the priest of Alcyone. So he is Emmanuel.
Okay.
And he describes that he met Alcyone for that moment, and he was amazed. Later on, he discovers her story, and he's amazed with her love and her light. So she is not his wife, because he would mention my loving wife became Alcyone. So it's not her. Just
well, I don't know if that's something that's going to come on later on, because we haven't. Like, Emmanuel hasn't built the bridge yet between chapters 1 and 2 on who is who. So just reading chapters 1 and 2, we don't know who was Pollux, we don't know who was Alcyone yet.
Oh, okay. No, I read many times this book. It's not.
Yes. So
that's
why I'm taking this from like I said, this one's a book that I haven't read yet. So that's the reason I jumped in on this group. It's like, oh, this is a book I haven't read. So
I didn't realize we were supposed to be trying to make connections here. So thank you, I guess, Brian, for bringing it up, I guess.
Well, as Angie knows, that like I've been with the movement now for 17 plus years. So I'm reading all kinds of books, and as I do lectures and topics and speaking to all the various centers, I try to blend the books together because they build upon each other. The doctrine, the 5 books of the doctrine is the foundation, but then you start bringing in these books, the Andre Luis books, the Valdo Franco books. You start building them, and they start building the structure on top of this foundation that was started with Allan Kardec and the doctrine.
Yes.
You can, and that's why I said, like, when you read it, like for me, when I read these books, I'm trying to see how they build on the stuff that we learn in our doctrinal studies. When we read the gospel, when we read the spirit book, mediums book, how they build on this. Like right now, we're seeing, to tie back into chapter 2, we're starting to see the beginnings of obsessions. So anyone that's read those chapters in the mediums book about obsessions, we're starting to see the beginnings of Susanna is beginning to have obsessions, and this other gentleman, this I forget the other one's the name, the other rival's name for Cyril.
Yes, Cirilo.
Antero
And yeah, Antero.
Yeah.
He's also building up obsessions. So now we have these two that are in the body, they're physical obsessions. But they're starting to, they're winding up.
Yes.
And
Can you explain to them why you think that's an obsession? Because I think they don't understand what's going on. There are 4 people at this moment. There are the 2 cousins, and there are just 2 other people. There is a girl, Madalena, that one of the cousins, the Cirilo, is in love with her, and the female cousin who is in love with Cirilo is angry at her friend. And there is another man who is this one that Brian is saying, that will be in love with her, the cousin. So it's 4 people
yes.
right now.
So it's not a love triangle, it's a love parallelogram by the looks of it.
Yeah, that is a square.
Yes. A love square. So
okay, what else can we say about the situation?
Well, as we see, about halfway through this chapter, we see that Cyril builds up the courage. He gets permission to ask for Magdalena's hand in marriage. So now he does the official proposal to Magdalena's parents, and then James, Susanna's father, sends a letter to Cyril's parents in Ireland to get, and then we find out that they give their blessings. And that is why Cyril's not in Ireland helping with the family things, as James mentions out. It's like, don't go to Ireland. You'll get wrapped up in all the family things, and they'll keep you there. This is a blessing for you. You found someone. I've met this woman. She's a great match for you. I see many blessings in your future. So he's encouraging Cyril to keep going with this marriage, and they're happy. They're starting to make plans for a life. They're even talking about coming to the Americas, which is still in colony status at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're they're not even unified colonies. So I'd assume, since she's Spaniard, he'd be coming to Florida. I mean, when you look at it, it was the Spaniards had Florida, had the South, and then you had the French that was kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
And then you had the English up north.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true. It's true.
So when they're planning their trip to the Americas, could be coming into one of our even St. Augustine, the oldest occupied city. They may be coming there. Who knows? We'll have to keep reading to find out. So as we're winding up towards the end of this chapter, we find out that Susanna's sister is getting married. So we end up having another wedding that's going to take place before Cyril and Magdalena's. So somewhere it sound, I think they said it was like November. So they were having a wedding in November, and then Cyril and Magdalena will be at Christmas. So we end the chapter having that first wedding, and we kind of start stepping up because all of a sudden we have this thing where Susanna has to be at the wedding, but she doesn't want to be there with Magdalena because she doesn't want to see the two of them as a couple, as an engaged couple at that. It bothers her. And then Antero, he's trying to be buddy, but with ulterior motives. So as we're leaving this and going into chapter 3, we are in this mode of like we're setting up something. We're setting up the wedding in the next one.
Yes. So Yvonne, what do you want to ask?
Or add an interesting twist is that at some point, I think Magdalena said in the past, she had a reading from a medium or something like that, that said that she will experience a lot of torment in her life, something to that effect.
A lot of suffering, yes.
Suffering. Yes. So I'm interested to see where that goes.
Yes,
we see that one being set up too, because she brought that up, and even though she's thinking, oh, I've got this great person, we're going to be happy, we get along great, we're like soulmates, we have all these blessings, but yet you're seeing the outsides, all these storm clouds building, and you're saying like, yes, it is leading towards potential suffering.
Yes.
And even James Davenport also mentioned in his life story, he was happy when his nest was small with his wife. But then when she inherited property in Beloy, I think it is, that's when things kind of started to fall apart, because instead of having a nest that was a home, they were too busy taking care of the house, making sure the house was prepared and everything else, and it didn't feel like a home. It became another chore, another task. So we're seeing that this same thing is happening here, where she's got that message that from an Egyptian that was saying that her life is going to be a life of a lot of sorrow. And we see that this is building, that's going to, looks like it's going to come true.
Yes. So at this chapter, so now we know that the two cousins, Cirillo, I don't know how is Cirillo in English. I don't know what's his
name. They call Cyril.
They call him Cyril. Okay. In
just Portuguese.
So Cyril and Susanna, they are cousins, and Susanna is in love with him, and but he is in love with her friend Madalena. So Susanna, Brian started talking about obsession because Susanna is making all kinds of plans in her head how to separate those two. That's why we start talking about obsession, when a person is trying to think something negative towards another. So he's sending all these negative vibrations because she's envious of what Madalena has. That's her cousin. And as you can see, in the past, there was no problems of cousins getting married, you know. Cousins can get married, piece of cake, no problem. They really didn't know it could have like physical diseases, problems. For example, my father is from a very, very, very tiny city in the middle of Brazil, and all cousins get married. That's not a problem. Thank God the family is really gigantic, so there are many generations. It's not just first cousin. But we already know in science that if the genes are very similar, the children can have physical problems, physical diseases generated because of this. But anyway, so that's how the obsession started. And it also can happen with this other gentleman that is in love with
Magdalena.
With Susanna, isn't it?
Magdalena.
Oh, he's also in love with Magdalena.
Susanna loves Cyril, and Tero, the cousin, wants to be with Magdalena. So each of the two has someone else that wants them.
Yeah. So
also talk about the fact that Magdalena's parents, O and Tara, he's been supporting them. This Antera person, he's been supporting Magdalena's parents, and that Antera expected that he would marry Magdalena.
yes, you brought a great point. Exactly. So Magdalena feels like she is obligated to get married to that gentleman because he is paying all the debts of her parents. So this is the other point that comes in the twist. So it's like this poor Magdalena, she already has all kinds of problems and she's still so young. So imagine, it's tough, not easy. Let's see, is any other important point on chapter 2 that we should mention, or that you guys would like to know? Let me know if you think there is any other.
I just want to mention that when I started reading chapter 2, I had to make sure I was in the right book, because chapter 1 and chapter 2 are so different. It's like, oh my gosh, where's this connection? So I had to do a double take to make sure I was reading the same book.
Yeah, it's true, because chapter 1 is all in the spiritual realm, and chapter 2 already comes to them incarnated and already older. They are not even kids. They are already jumped to a point that they are already adults, you know. And so it really looks very, very different. But it starts becoming a total soap opera. It's really like, that's why I wanted John to read, because he loves soap operas. I'm like, my God, if he read this book, he would be absolutely sure of the spiritual soap opera. Unfortunately, at this moment, he's already sleeping. He goes to bed at 8:30. So you can imagine. But okay, I think that's it. Any other questions, any comments that anyone would like to make? Listen, our meetings is really for us to give an overlook, to clarify any doubts. It's very difficult for us to summarize so many beautiful details. Brian did a good job, but it is not easy. And if we don't read, it sounds weird, because imagine me and Brian, we are talking about so many things. You find it weird. So take few days really to be able to focus on reading, because this is a magical book, and so many things. You're going to see so many twists later on that you are going to be like, what? This really can happen? Yes, it's and it is crazy. So what we are going to do is, let's just skip the 28th, because it's like, you know, Christmas, New Year's, everybody traveling. I'm going to send a message that we are going to skip the 28th. And let me just look here. What is the next? Is the 2nd. We meet always on the 2nd and the 4th.
On the 11th.
So we skip the 28th, and so we are going to meet again in the 11th, January 11th. So January 11th will be chapter 3, because we finished chapter 2. And it's actually good, because I would like to do one chapter a month, and because we are not going to have the next meeting, so that's very good. So we already killed the chapter 2 today. And so, Yvonne, would you be able to do what Brian did on the 11th?
I will try, but I'm sure I can't do as well as he did.
You should try together. Sonia and Yvonne, you both should read chapter 3, because if it happens like Julio disappeared, if one of you disappear, we have a backup.
Yes.
And you know, It's just like you don't even need to do the whole chapter. You can do half of the chapter. So take the most important points, what you thought was really striking. Try to summarize until half of the chapter, and then the following meeting that will be on the 25th of January. Then we can finalize chapter 3. So this also gives time to everybody to read chapter 3. It's amazing book. We have to read it. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, just to show you, now I'm in like 3 book club right now, so I'm reading all 3 of these.
oh my God.
Oh
Jesus
my God.
Nowadays, what is the first book? What is the first book?
Jesus in Our Days. I was actually, this takes place right before this class. They do it every Thursday from 8 to 9. Then Plenitude in Florida, they are doing about like this, about twice a month. We're reading Planetary Transitions. Now, I finished this one on my own already, so this
Yeah.
thankfully I
I'm reading that one on my own, Planetary Transition.
Yeah, I'm finalizing it. It's a beautiful book. Beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, and then we're doing Renunciation, and then on my own, I'm also reading this one. So I'm reading 4 books simultaneously.
Which one is this one?
The new one that came out at the symposium.
Oh, okay, the newest one. Yes. Oh my God! In New York, I used to read so many books at the same time because I had 1 hour to go, 1 hour to come back in a subway.
The only trouble is I always highlight. So I'm highlighting the living snot out of the books.
It's good. It's good. It's good. Very good, everybody. So to the ones that are here in Miami or even next Thursday, we are going to have our Christmas dinner. So we are welcome seeing all of you in the center. Will be really nice. We are going to show a short movie, and then we can have a great conversation and enjoy our last meeting of the year. To the other ones,
my first time down there.
yes, you're coming.
Yes, Claudia got wrangled me up.
Oh, good. Very good. Very good. So if I don't see you all, Merry Christmas. God bless you all. Miss you, and I hope to see you in person. Thank you, everybody. Merry Christmas. Thank
Good
you.
night,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas.
God bless you all.
Thank you, Angie.
Bye.